Because I look at people and I was like, you were dumb enough to do it. Deal with it.
Facebook is drama. It's high school drama. It really is. How many pastors have gotten in trouble because of Facebook?
Yeah.
How many marriages got in trouble with Facebook?
Right.
I don't do Facebook.
I was helping with the youth one day. I looked around. I thought, my pacemaker's older than every kid in here. You know? Yeah.
I think a lot of Americans, even, dare I say, American Christians, I say that loosely, will sell their souls to maintain a lifestyle if it comes down to that. And that, I think, is very dangerous.
One of the things that Verna and I have done over the years when we find ourselves in difficult situations is that we will go through the litany of the various times that God has helped us. And we express those out loud to each other, and they serve as a reminder to us that God was through us in this situation, and this situation, and this situation. What makes us think he's not going to be with us in this one as well?
The next week after that first state championship game, they joined the church. And their words were this: you cared enough to drive 6 hours for a kid that's not yours. That tells me something.
Hi, I'm Chris McNeil, and this is Ministry on the Move, a podcast interviewing pastors and ministers across the USA. As the father of the McNeils, I get to travel across the country singing the gospel, and one day it occurred to me that you all need to know each other. You are a part of the extended McNeil family and the body of Christ. Join me on a journey to churches of all shapes and sizes, different parts of the country, and see just what it takes to shepherd the body of Christ. For more information on the McNeils, you can visit us at mcneilmusic.tv or mcneilmusic.com. Thanks for joining us, and here's the episode. Hey everybody, this is Chris. So glad that you joined us for this episode of Ministry on the Move. It sure would be helpful if you guys would be just take a moment to leave a review on Apple or iTunes or any other venue where you consume the podcast, but especially iTunes. iTunes and Apple seem to be the big player in the market. It looks like right now approximately 60% of you are listening on Apple and iTunes. And that helps people find us and get the word out. And it looks like this thing's growing, and I really do appreciate all of you that are listening. I would love to meet some of you. If you have that desire, please reach out. The ways that you can communicate with me are listed at the top and the outro of the show. Today, we're going to hear the first part of an interview with Ryan Wells, who is the pastor at First Baptist Church in Dewar, Texas. Dewar, Oklahoma, right outside of Henrietta, Oklahoma. And Ryan and I first met, I think, in 2020, in the middle of COVID. We did a Christmas concert, and we'll talk about that on the podcast. But he and I became friends, and it's so good to catch up with him. Normally we're there for 4th of July anymore, but this year we were there for Christmas. And this was the last concert that the McNeils did in 2024 before we, took 10 days off or so to celebrate Christmas and relax. So here is the first part of my interview with Ryan Wells of First Baptist Church, Dewar, Oklahoma. Okay, this is Chris McNeil, Ministry on the Move. The McNeils are in Oklahoma today. Dewar, First Baptist Church, Dewar, Pastor Ryan Wells, and this is, I think we said, our 4th time to be with you guys? No, it's been more than that.
I am thinking it's 5.
I think so too, because we've done 3.
Two Christmas, 3 4th of Julys.
I think so too.
5 total.
Yeah, okay.
Not bad.
Yeah, it's been a good run.
It's a great run.
I hope it's not the last, but
no.
Ryan, so we met in the middle of COVID, and it was a very interesting the way the concert went because Frank, the minister of music here, had COVID, and had just gotten out, and we sort of had to. We didn't cancel the Christmas thing during COVID, but we had to pivot, and so we did the concert to, I think 7 people were in the congregation or something like that. We had some-
Tops. 7 tops.
This is yous, the Lesters, and then some friends of ours that had driven from
Kansas, Missouri.
Yeah, and they didn't know that the concert was only online. And so you guys were gracious enough to let them in. So that was our first, and that was a Christmas concert. And the other 3 have been not Christmas concerts. But so it was good to be back, get to do a real live Christmas show or service with real live people in the audience. So you have been here, I think you said, for coming up on 15 years. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so came in 2010. The church called me as their youth pastor. Our pastor at the time was older, but never would have foreseen his retirement just a couple of years later. So, but yeah, ever since 2010, we have been here. I say we because my family have been here. And the unique thing is that this is the church I grew up in. So, you know, we moved back to Dewar or Henrietta when I was 13. Grew up in Muskogee, came here, went through school. My wife and I both went to OBU. We spent about 10 years away from this area, but came back 2010 and really up to today still here, as you know, which is great news.
So you would have been what, 26, I guess, when you took
Oh my
this?
goodness. So let's see, I started pastoring here when I was 31. So that was 2014 when I started that. I actually started as interim, not sure what the pastorate was going to look like. So just about 3 years as youth pastor, and then a little bit of time in interim, and then senior pastor since that moment, 2014.
Talk about the transition. Did you want to be a pastor, and youth minister was the stepping stone, or?
You know, looking back, you know, there's been I think some concrete things that the Lord revealed to us that I just frankly missed. I don't want to say 0% chance in my mind thinking that I would be a senior pastor. I think I felt like my wheelhouse was youth. And I was smart enough to know that a transition from youth to senior adult ministry, not senior adult ministry, just pastoral ministry was a big deal. Yep. And I knew that, and you know, it's a big deal no matter what, but in particular, our church here and those that are listening have probably no idea necessarily what Dewar is like, but you know, I followed a pastor of 25 years who is well known in our community, well known in our state. So apart from just the sheer being scared to follow someone whose feet are the size, you know, of Shaquille O'Neal situation versus where I was at, that was enough to just keep me from it, if that makes sense. So, you know, when he announced his retirement, there was a momentary, you know, blip in my life. I was like, you know what, maybe, but it was just kind of distant. So strangely enough, we were on our way to Branson, my wife and I believe Macy was just 2 or 3 years old. We were going to take a trip to Branson, and on the way, I can remember exactly where we were at when I got the phone call. We were in Hollister. I guess that would be Missouri, or is that maybe that's still in Arkansas? I cannot remember exactly, but I got the phone call from one of our deacons with just what you asked me. You know, would you consider or have you thought about being a senior pastor? And so that little, you know, spot on the road will forever change me, because this is going to sound crazy, but it literally messed up our vacation, because that's not a question that you get often, or that you can process as a not even, well, right at 30-year-old individual. And you know, it kind of blew us away that, first of all, the church might even consider us, but second of all, man, I was scared to death.
Sure.
So
It's And I think we probably need more men like that are afraid to step into the pulpit.
Yeah.
Because it's a pretty grave responsibility. I don't know if it was you or Frank that I was telling this morning that, it was Frank. He told me a story about some song that he had just fallen in love with, and he said he was kind of making the congregation learn it. And I said, well, I think that's your responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Because you're responsible for the spiritual tide of this fellowship. And the example that I gave him was, as a pastor, you could choose not to go to the Old Testament, or not go to the New Testament, or not preach from the book of, fill in the blank.
Yep.
Or to only stay in the book of whatever, or to not be in a book at all. And so I think, but I do think, I believe in accountability. I think the Lord will hold us all accountable for the talents that we had,
Yeah.
and how we choose to use them. What was it like? Like, did you need a unanimous? Was it unanimous, or do you know?
I felt like we had been in the church long enough. Like I said, from 13 till when I graduated, I was in the youth group here. So, and my parents as well, serving as college and career teachers. My dad was a deacon, still is a deacon here, and they both still teach college and career. I think, if I'm just kind of chasing a little bit of rabbit, but I'm pretty sure they told me they're close to 45 years of teaching college and career.
Oh, wow.
Which is crazy, because that's a tough group.
Right.
Sure. They're here one moment, gone the next, back, the following week. But yeah, just to kind of go back to the question there of, I felt confident that, not in myself, I'll say that, but I had felt confident that I had learned enough, grew up enough. The foundation was really set in my life. Been under some pretty good pastors, been in ministry just kind of on the periphery. And with that, I felt confident that I could learn quickly, if that makes sense. Because there is a learning curve. I went to seminary, and obviously that provided some things, but there's still nothing like on-the-job training. Right. And I knew that. I set a high bar for myself, and certainly you can get knocked off that quickly in ministry. But I was confident in God, number one, but I was confident that I had the basics that I could work through just about anything. And, sadly, that was tested pretty early on. Right. And still at times, you're going to have those moments. But yeah, 15 years total here at the moment, and it's still going.
So what has your view of what a pastor's job is, has that view changed in your responsibilities? The way that you would talk to a 25-year-old and say, oh, you want to go into the ministry? Here's what you're really asking to do. Has that changed in 15 years?
I can't speak for all the guys that are in pastoral ministry or in a similar situation as me, but I would think they would all say yes. I mean, when you don't know, even though I was on staff and felt, connected to the pastor day in and day out of what he was going through, there's no way to replicate that. I wasn't on the phone call that he was on. I wasn't, officiating the wedding that he officiated. I wasn't officiating the funeral. I wasn't hanging out at the homes of a family in bereavement. Right. Those things I knew were going on in his life, but until you're the one holding the umbrella, as I've heard in the past, there's just no way. So you've heard him say the old adage, coming in green. Yeah, I was green, no doubt. Right. And I would still say that even just year to year, it changes some. I don't know if that's just a cop-out, but I do think that every year you're learning more. You look back and think, man, I wish I'd have done that different, or why did I do it that way? Just studying scripture, kind of learning, leaning on people. The hardest word in ministry is no, but yet it's got to be there. Right. Because you can run wild. And somebody told me many years ago, kind of speaking to ministry and the standard of that. If you don't have ministry at home, you're likely to not have ministry in the church.
Right.
And so you've got to take care of that, and that's got to be solid. And again, not always hit that as a home run, but I do think it's changed, for me, for us, and then just maybe also tagging onto that, the landscape of ministry. I was just telling my Sunday school class this morning, the way a pastor could pastor, and this is not a shot at an old school pastor at all, but I think pastoral ministry 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago is much different than today.
I think so.
And the things asked of pastors today, the tasking of meeting the needs of a family, and how many, I don't know what the stats are, but it could be upwards of 5 or 6 personal touches before a family is convinced that that this is the church for them. When, again, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, you could have just made an afternoon phone call on a Sunday. Hey, thanks for coming to visit, our church. Yeah. We love you, appreciate you, come back. And then they were probably in. Now it's multiple layers of connecting with those families before they're ready to make a commitment to that church. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What do you think drives that?
I think it's the change in culture, the change of the landscape of culture, and how we. It's not just in deciding a church. It's deciding when you're buying a car, buying a home. How many times? Oftentimes it's, hey, let me test the waters a couple times. Let me go test drive this car. Hey, let us do a walkthrough in this home a couple different times. They're not sold right off. And part of that could just be the hurt in ministry. Maybe because we are a world at our fingertips now, we see the worst in church, not always the best.
Yeah.
I mean, you turn on the news, you flip through your social media, and you're seeing the next great pastor that's fallen. You've seen somebody else in ministry that goofed up and made a mistake, and maybe that's just kind of culture shift of we know everything right now, real time, and they want to make sure that that's the place for them, whether they're seeking God for that or just their family, their personal preference. We have seen that challenge even in this church.
It's a fascinating. As I'm sitting here thinking, I asked basically the same question on the very first podcast I ever did. It was with Justin Gatlin out of Alvin, Texas, and he went the opposite direction with it. And I think that both of you are right. So I'm going to frame the question, and it's going to take me a second. But he said basically that we have perfection at our fingertips today. Not that we see the failures, and I think you're absolutely right. I think we do see the failures. I think he's also got onto something that we see Photoshop, auto-tune, autocorrect, perfection on an 85-inch screen TV that we're able to watch from our church from our pajamas.
Yes.
And I think between those two, between the reason you gave and the reason Justin has given, that there still lies not only a need for authenticity, but more than that, because we can be authentically stupid, right? We need authenticity, but an authentic Christian faith that is pursuing the Lord.
Yeah.
And so those are really two, it's like a bowling lane, right? You can, people are dipping their toe into it because they don't want perfection, and they're dipping their toe in it because they don't want stupidity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fine line.
Right. Yeah.
It leaves no room for mess up either way. And I think that pressure can really get to both the ministry side,
sure,
but also the family side. I feel like that we want members or guests, kind of our new terminology is kind of the art of the handoff. So how do we get someone further down the road in their spiritual disciplines, their Christian life, their service to the church, year over year. And that's a challenge. It can really be a challenge. And if there is one little blip, to use one of your terms, along the way, man, it just seems to derail young people quicker now than it used to. The forgiveness is maybe not quite there, and it's or they've been previously hurt, and that was their last, log to put on the fire, and it's going to be consumed. And so ministry has lots of pressures today that I can't speak for those that pastored 30, 40 years ago, and I would certainly never want to minimize their work, but I do think it's much different today than it used to be.
So one of the things that I was thinking about this recently, thinking about how evangelism and the evangelical church, which I am a product of and a large proponent of. And yet, there does seem to be a real focus on always talking about the cross and the empty tomb, which are absolutely crucial and vital to the success of any church. I'm not even for a minute suggesting that we abandon the gospel. But the question then becomes, at what point do we talk about selling everything you have and giving it to the poor and following Jesus, right? At what point do you take that next step into a deeper relationship? How has the evangelical church maybe sort of forgotten that, or what can we do to kick it up a notch and call people not just to faith, but to a life of adventure in following Christ?
Yeah. Well, I think immediately what comes to my mind is the boots on the ground in the church. And I think it's no secret that churches in America are not on incline, they're on decline.
Yeah.
Right? That's not just in attendance, but if you are losing attendance, then you're obviously losing funds. And the result of that is you are losing full-time positions who would now become Bible positions. You are losing full-time, secondary staff or other ministerial positions that are either dissolving or they're being reduced, right?
Yep.
So, I still think it is vitally important that churches have a well-equipped staff. And that means oftentimes full-time positions, folks that are dedicated to that position week in, week out, day in, day out, sometimes hour by hour, right? And so I can only speak for us here at Dewar. We've made a concerted effort to not have bivocational positions. If at all possible, to hire full-time guys, girls, whatever, so that we can actually make a dent, as someone told me many years ago, piercing the darkness with light.
Right.
And yeah, we can equip our own people, and we should. As pastors, we're called to equip the saints. And I think that comes, as you're teaching, as you're investing in Sunday school. But when as I was talking about, just kind of going back, when pastors are asked to do 10 times more than they used to with the same amount of time, the same amount of money, and oftentimes less resources, you can see the grind of that. You just feel like you're on that treadmill, right? You're moving, but you're not moving.
So I think you said there were 250 people here this morning.
Yep.
And you have a staff of at least 3?
Yeah, so we have 3 full-time, and we have 2 Bivo positions, and we're actually fixing to add another Bivo position this next year, and hopefully for 2026. And so we're not regressing; we're actually increasing and trusting the Lord for the funds to make that happen, because we know the importance of young families. For instance, that's a focus for us this next year. Is we literally just moved one of our full-time positions up a notch to an associate pastor position, so that we can focus and have more of a concerted effort on young families and keeping them here. That's the target group, right? Like,
yeah.
That's my group that aren't committed like they should be. In fact, they say if they come half the time, that's considered commitment these days. 50%
That's right.
attendance is considered commitment. We don't want that. We want them here week in, week out, and investing in their
Yeah.
kids. So that's the challenge of ministry today, is churches seeing the fruit of that and trusting that they're going to be able to give. And our hope is that as we gain families, we are gaining the monetary things, right? We're hopefully every family that comes, and as we're talking with them, they're investing and tithing and giving back to the Lord. So, I guess for me, and I don't think this is, prideful in saying this, I just believe that God's going to provide, especially if we're in His will. And we know that He sees the fruit of what we're trying to do. We're just blessed here at Dewar to be able to get that done. And I know many churches don't have the resources, and it all falls on the pastor to figure it out. And I think it's just an unfair shake because they can't do it all.
Yeah, and we're gonna come back to that here in just a second. It used to be a real question mark over my head about what's the big deal about growth, and then I realized, because I would say, well, cancer is a growth, but it's not one that you really want.
Right.
But then the other side of it sort of hit me, that if you are not growing, you are dying.
Right.
There's really not a stasis, and you're talking about this young generation, and I say this is a very high compliment. I think that your church represents the age demographic very, very well. Yeah, there's some white hair out there, but there was a lot of youth, and there were a lot of young families out there, and that's to be commended. As we go from place to place, that's not always the case. And I mean, I don't know that it has to be. What would you say in your mind? I don't want to say the secret, but let's just say that you're talking to a 20-year-old Ryan, your version of yourself, and saying, well, here's what you can expect. How do you coach a young pastor to start thinking about those things and what really constitutes growth in the church, and how do you do that well?
Yeah. Well, I think that you got to start with it's going to take work. It doesn't matter what age you come into ministry, you're going to have to work for it, and you're going to have to invest time, effort, and energy. But as you learn about yourself, as you learn about ministry, as you learn the word no, you learn to delegate. There's beauty in that, And again, I think I've hit that at times in the sweet spot, and then there's times I haven't. There's times I regress. There's times I make forward movement. But for a young pastor coming in, just to know that the importance of the self-care, that's the big push now, kind of the own soul care of making sure that you are spiritually sound so that you can handle the difficult moments. It's not if they come, it's when they come, right?
Sure.
And those tides come in and they go out, but those young pastors that come in, the unfortunate part is that we live in that society of instantaneous gratification. And many come in and say, well, if I don't start at a church that's 250 or above, then what am I?
Right.
If I don't start at whatever that threshold is, maybe it's 100 for somebody. And then it's kind of that movement forward. I think for all of us, it's like, well, if I'm at a church at 100, my next move is a church that's 150. My next move is a church that's 250. And it's just never ending battle of finding that gratification, whether that's through yourself or somebody else, or if you want that in Christ. And so I've tried not to look at numbers week in and week out, although we use it as a litmus test and really statistically speaking to kind of gauge where we're at. But I can't remember if I told you this or not, Chris, but when the first time you guys came, right before that, we had a deacons meeting in my office. And our church was at the height of its growth. We were pushing 400 in service and pushing 300 in Sunday school. And then COVID hit.
Right.
and we spent almost 2 years trying to figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. And you guys were part of that, unfortunately, here, trying to figure out how you're going to continue ministry and how we're going to continue ministry. I don't want this to sound like this is always the cop-out answer, but that really changed things for most churches.
Oh, it did.
Some for the good,
Right.
right? Some things needed to be cold. And then there's other things that just made it even more difficult. Eye contact, face-to-face visits. Can you visit at a door anymore without getting shot? Can you? It really has made things difficult. And if a young pastor is not willing to kind of work hard in ministry so that the rewards can come, and it's not always work hard rewards. You hope that you're going to work hard anyway, but prioritizing that your time, family, work. Again, and just saying that word no at times, lovingly and graciously, because the season it was all, because some don't care how you say it, or if you got a smile on your face, it can really hurt their feelings. But yeah.
Okay, so I've got enough silence in here that I can X this out if you don't want to answer the request. But you told me a story right before lunch about one of the barometers that you've introspectively asked yourself from time to time. If just a hypothetical, do you mind sharing that?
Yeah. So I'm assuming you're alluding to, hey, what if the Lord called you to a smaller church?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, yeah, for those listening, it was, I don't know why I come up with that, by the way, other than it's just, I've thought about it from time to time. I know the hours of work that I put in here week in, week out. I've been here long enough to know I've got some smart academic people in this church. They are, the smartest in the business, whatever. And yeah, you want to give your best, but you don't necessarily want it to be because you've got this group listening to you, right? And you want to make sure you got the Greek and the Hebrew all figured out in the sentence structure so that, you do justice to the text, but then there's that part of you's like, yeah, but I want to impress them a little bit so they know I study. And really the question was, what if God called me to a church of 100 or 50 or 25? Would I have that same energy, that same care, the same juice that I would have on a Sunday morning for a group like that's much smaller? And boy, that really, for whatever reason, has just kind of entangled my mind because, I think we all have the VBS answer, which is, yeah, I would still do that. But would you really?
Right.
And so you guys were talking about it, maybe asked you if you sing in front of 10 people versus singing in front of 1,500, that personality, that church, those people still need to hear from you.
That's right.
They still need your best. And so, boy, whether you edit this out or not, I think we all have to understand that we are replaceable. We really are.
Right.
And God has a funny way of humbling us sometimes.
Oh, man.
To get us to understand the life that can be in a small church.
Yep. Yeah.
Or the opposite, the death that can be in a small church. And maybe God would send you there to revive it. Who knows? So, yeah, man, that's a real struggle sometimes.
I can't tell you the number of times that we've heard a pastor pray over us before. Maybe he doesn't know us. Maybe he does, and maybe he's just talking from rote. But he might say, Lord, we know that they're only singing for an audience of one, right? And it's a trope, right? It's a pithy statement that we've all come to sort of understand. And yet, that really quite finely puts the finger on it, doesn't it?
Yep.
That really, at the end of the day, I'm not getting on a bus to impress people.
Yeah.
Although they tell me sometimes that was impressive or whatever. But ultimately, we could do the same in a country western bar.
Right. Yes.
You could be a motivational speaker. But that's not the call.
Right.
I just think that that's a really fine question for a pastor because, we've sung in front of 10,000 before.
Yeah.
And we've never outnumbered the congregation. I told you about the one time that there was 12 at downbeat and 16 by the time we got finished with the first song. That's as low as it's ever gotten. We've never outnumbered the congregation.
Yeah.
But does it matter? And you talk about how, I'm kind of putting things together, and then let's go back to the solitary aspect of this. But everything that you've said sort of funnels down into that idea that what the people around us need to see is not impressive. It's not perfection. It's not a perfectly diagrammed sentence in Greek.
Yeah.
It's not that I heard somebody say they were preaching on the New Testament, and they said, and that's a Greek word. And I'm like, well, duh, the whole stinking, you got a little bit of Arabic in there, but other than that, I'm pretty sure the whole thing was done in Greek.
Yeah.
They don't want him to be impressed as much as they want to see real. And I guess that just comes with only when skin is in the game.
Yeah.
Whether it's 1 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, and the Lord can choose to put us in any of those circumstances.
Absolutely.
And I just think it's such a brilliant way of asking. I've never heard it asked from a pastor's perspective. Would you be willing to go down the ladder? Because for us that's 1 week. Right. For you, it's the foreseeable future.
Sure.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a diatribe on my part.
Well, that's okay.
But I think it was I'm trying to summarize kind of where we were. Talk about how I think the word you used was unfair. Maybe that's not the word, but you talk about how, and I ask this a lot to pastors all around. You're Superman, right?
Yeah.
You're the pastor. You can't have problems. You're not allowed to sin. Your wife can't leave you. Your children have to be perfectly behaved. How do you deal with the fact that none of that's really reality? I should stop and say, you've got a wonderful wife to whom you've been married for as long as we've known you, and you only have the one wife, and you've got wonderful children. In fact, you've adopted 2. So I'm not picking on you, is what I'm trying to say, because there's somebody out there that's listening to that going, oh, he's interviewing a pastor that did that. No, that's not what I'm saying. But how do you deal with the expectation? Now you've got Frank, and you've got Trent, and you've got other people here with on the staff that are going through the same thing, and I guess you can be consoled by each other.
Yeah. I think it's always hard to navigate that extended family circus at times.
Yeah. I like to say we put the fun in dysfunctional.
That's, I guess in one way I'm grateful because my wife likes to serve, wants to serve. It was, I wouldn't say it was easy for her, but she just kind of assumed that because, that's just what she's seen mirrored in her life, right? So, pastor's wife, you need to do something. You just can't sit, whatever.
Right.
So
she's as much on staff as you are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's what makes us a good team. She can sense my weaknesses at times. She can sense my strengths. She can sense when I'm down, when I'm up. She is really faithful of, hey, you all right? What everything clicking? Is everything not clicking? She rides the same roller coaster that you're on, and oftentimes she's in the seat right next to you, right? So every bump and hill that you go around, every twist and turn, she's in it with you.
Yep.
Right. So, but she's been so good to, she teaches Sunday school class. She's done nursery ministry. I think she did for like 9 years. And, the thing that unfortunately is kind of the terminology in church today is the high standard of the wife to be superwoman. If he's Superman, then we expect her to be Superwoman.
That's right.
And she, although loves her husband who happens to be the pastor, those expectations can draw them away from the love of the church at times. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally.
And that's not what we want.
Yeah, because they hired you, not her.
Right.
Right. She didn't sign up for
She
this
did not
necessarily.
Sign up. No. I wasn't even when we got married, ministry was not even in my top 10 list.
I was going to ask.
Right. So we had been married almost 10 years before, and really not even had a child yet. It was just kind of right on the prefaces of that. But
surprise, you married a pastor.
Here you go. And here she is. But I think she's okay with that, and so for those pastors out there, you've heard the old adage, water off a duck's back, and there's some truth to that you got to let some of it go.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've been there long enough, maybe like I have been here and other pastors have been, you can lovingly and graciously combat that as you're having one-on-one discussions. Like, she's not Superwoman, and she has my wife's a full-time teacher. She teaches in, school system, and she's got 3 kids at home. She doesn't need another job on Sunday. She's got a full-time one already during the week, but she does graciously, help in this church. So that's great.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Ministry on the Move. I've been your host, Chris McNeil. To learn more about the McNeils, you can find us on the web at mcneilmusic.com, mcneilmusic.tv, themcneilproject.com, on Facebook at The McNeils, YouTube at The McNeils. We are on all of the usual suspects. God bless you. We'll see you next time. I found a book called How to Solve 50% of Your Problems, so I bought 2.